Today we're going to talk about 10 things that you need to know for 2018. I have been general counsel for Marketo for about 7 weeks. I had stepped aside and retired from Sabre at the end of 2014. I had done some work for a law firm for a couple years and was really enjoying the semi-hobo lifestyle. And a friend of mine called who was the CFO at Marketo, and somehow, I'm still not sure how he did it, he convinced me to come back in-house. And one of the things I've realized is a lot of the things that I have written over the past 2 years in the blog are much harder to implement when you're actually sitting in the chair than when you're just sitting on the sidelines going, yeah, this was really cool and we did it 4 years ago or 5 years ago. So I'm much more sympathetic, and I think I'll be a more careful writer maybe as we go forward. But today's topic is something that I will be focusing on as we get ready to look at 2018. All right, so as I mentioned, I think every year, if you're an in-house lawyer, if you're the general counsel, or you're just someone starting their in-house career, you should spend some time thinking about what is it that we need to do in the coming year. And it's the perfect time to do that now, right? It's almost October, you've got a couple months to go, you're probably working on budgets, probably a lot of strategy sessions going around in the corporation. It's the perfect time to sit down and think about what are the things we should be focusing on for 2018. And 2018, this isn't that unique, but there's a lot of things I think are going to happen. One, there's going to be a lot of political change. Two, there's going to be all types of new technology you're going to need to be aware of. Three, of course, there's always new laws. And four, and this may not be something you're thinking about a whole lot right now, but there's going to be a lot more baby boomers starting to retire, and that's going to have a lot of impact on legal departments, not only here in Canada, here in Calgary, but all over the world as those people start to leave and the next generation of leaders, the millennials, start to come in, for example, and how are you going to deal with that? But you always need to be flexible, right? Because as you know, as an in-house lawyer, you'll make plans and they'll instantly get changed, right? It could be your plan for the morning and you have 3 things you're going to work on, and by the time it's 11 a.m., that's all out the window and you're on to something else. That's the same thing when you're making yearly plans, but you have to start somewhere, right? And you just have to be flexible, and you have to be thinking about, well, what is it that is going to be important to the company, it's going to be important to the legal department that we should be focusing on. And what I do is I had my dad was an engineer, and he worked at a refrigeration plant, and I used to work summers for him when I was in college. And what I noticed is every year he would take out 52 index cards, and for every week of the next year he would write down, these are the things we're going to do week 1. This is what we're going to do week 17. This is what we're going to do week 34. He had, if it was, we had to grease this machine, or we had to clear out this brush or whatever, he had it all written down. And I thought, you know what? That's weird, Dad. But it also, as I got older, I realized that it made a lot of sense, right? You have to have a plan. You have to be thinking about what you're going to do. And I actually adopted this. I didn't use the index cards, but on my Outlook calendar, I set up a separate calendar. And for every week of the year, I started to put tasks down that we were going to do as a legal department. And some of those I'll share with you today. There's obviously more than I could possibly put into 10. But I knew every January we were going to do X, and every March we were going to do Y, and every December we were going to do K, whatever we were up to. And that made things a lot easier, not only for me as being the general counsel, but for the people who worked for me, right? There was a continuity, there was a cadence, there was something that they could follow, and it all came out of this very simple idea that I'm sure my dad didn't originate it, but it worked really well. It's just these index cards telling us what we're going to do at any particular time. So if you want to steal that idea, my dad says you're welcome. You can have it. It's free. So here are my top 10 things that I think you should work on for 2018. So the first is, and you may not think politics is something that in-house legal departments should be worried about. I tell you, it is probably the most important thing you should worry about, because what they're doing in Ottawa, what they're doing in Washington, what they're doing in Brussels, you name it, will have a tremendous impact on how you operate your legal department, how your company operates, the issues that you're going to have to deal with. And these are just some of the things that I picked out, because what I'll do is I'll read newspapers or magazines or legal publications or just watch the TV news, and I'll jot down things like, I wonder what's going to happen with NAFTA and the trade agreement. Is that going to impact my company? Do we need to start planning for whatever changes that are being discussed? Possibly, depends on what your company's business is. Mr. Trump, complete wild card, have no idea what he's going to do. I don't think anyone in Washington does, but there's a lot of change going on. Is healthcare going to be different? Are the regulations going to be different? How am I going to respond to that? How are we going to respond to that? Same with North Korea. Now you have Donald Trump and Mr. Kim staring each other down. What's that going to mean? And here's a great example. We were planning for one of my lawyers at my new company to go to Japan and visit our office. And she said, I don't think I'm comfortable going to Japan. And I said, well, why? What's wrong with Japan? She goes, well, they're firing missiles over Japan. I don't know if I want to be there if something happens. I hadn't thought about that or focused on that, but you know what? She's right. So that's something that I have to think about and we have to accommodate that you may not have thought was completely relevant. Brexit, what's going to happen if you have a lot of operations in the UK and if it actually pulls out of the EU, what's that going to mean for you? Climate change. It has a lot of tinges of politics around it, obviously. Certainly in the United States, there's a lot of discussion about it. I don't think you can deny that climate change is real. You may disagree about the cause, okay, fine, but the climate is changing, and that's having a lot of effects in all parts of the world. It could be hurricanes, it could be earthquakes, it could be a lot of different things. Are you prepared if your offices in Florida suddenly are going to go underwater because they're built right on the shore and the oceans are rising? How are you going to deal with that? What type of insurance coverage do you have to deal with something like that? If you had an office in Houston and the hurricane came through, what's your business continuity planning? These are all things that in-house lawyers are either part of or in charge of. It just depends on how your company operates. One of the things that I remember very distinctly when I was at Travelocity, you might remember this, there was a volcano in Iceland that erupted maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And I was watching this on the news, and you go, wow, that's really terrible. There's this cloud of ash over, and, fortunately, it didn't seem like anyone really got hurt. But I started thinking about, then they start talking about cancellations of air flights, right? And I'm going, oh, crap. What volume are we going to have in our call center of people trying to cancel or reschedule flights? Are we responsible for a volcano going off? What's our liability? So you start thinking about all these issues, things that you might not necessarily think really impact you. You just always have to be thinking about, wow, what's this going to mean for me? And of course, anytime the laws change or there's regulatory issues, that's definitely going to impact the legal department. And, are you watching those far enough out? We're going to talk about GDPR here in just a minute, but, GDPR has been on the horizon for several years. And if you're, an in-tune in-house lawyer and you have data that you're going to be processing, you're already watching that train coming down the track. If you've just woken up today that, hey, there's this law that goes in effect in May, you may be really behind the curve. You may be in trouble. I'm not saying you are, but you might be. So those are things that I think in-house lawyers need to do and always be on top of our global politics, certainly local politics, but just politics in general. So number 2 on my list, we were talking a little bit about GDPR, data breach planning. If you work for Equifax at the moment, you probably wish you were doing a little bit better job of data breach planning, because it seems like they didn't have a clue about what to do when a breach actually happened. And we'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow as well. But there are some key things here that you should be focusing on in 2018 if you don't already have these, or maybe you have them and you're just going to worry about updating them. But first, you need to have a written plan, right? The first time you shouldn't be thinking about how you're going to respond to a data breach is when there's a breach. There should be some plan already written out with who you're going to contact, who's going to get in the room, who's going to call who, what are all the contact numbers, all the things you would expect to have in a plan, so that people are starting to follow the rules versus making it up as they go. And that's the worst thing that can possibly happen, right, is making it up as you go along. And not only should you have a plan, then you should practice it. And what they call that is a tabletop exercise, because literally what that means is you sit around a table and there's some type of simulation of a breach, a little bit like what we're going to do tomorrow, and there's a lot of decision points that have to be made, and you see, well, how well does our plan work? It may be that, gee, all these people have left the company, but they're the only people listed in the plan. We need to update that. So those are the things that you'll learn from actually running an exercise. Training employees. About 70% of the issues that occur with data are the result of employee issues. It's very rare that it's a malicious employee, right? Someone who's trying to break in and steal something. Usually it's something innocent, it's something silly, it's something like clicking on a malicious link, it's someone doing some social engineering, pretending they're the CEO and they want you to wire $10 million to this account, and you go, oh, well, the CEO asked me, and off it goes, and next thing you know, the CEO's going, why did you just wire $10 million based on an email? So what are your procedures there? We used to do a test when I was at Sabre, and I would take flash drives, USB drives, and we would just toss a couple around in the parking lot or wherever, and it was amazing just to watch people would go by. They would inevitably pick them up, and if you follow them, they would go to their computer, and the first thing they would do is they would stick that drive right in the computer because they wanted to know, well, what's on this drive? What's in it? It could have been a virus. It could have been a million different things, and you really need to spend time training your employees over just good data security, over strong passwords, right? If their password is password, you already have a problem. So those are things that are well worth the effort. It doesn't cost a lot of money to do, but will save you a lot of time in the future. And then finally, encrypting the data, both when it's on the move. It's really easy to encrypt data when it's being transmitted. It's harder and it's more expensive to encrypt the data when it's at rest. But if you have encrypted data and there's a breach, that data, I think pretty much 99.9% is useless to whoever stole it. And that saves you an amazing amount of work and a lot of obligations around data breach reporting or just worried about what the bad guys might do with that data. So those are some things that I would be thinking about for 2018 around the issue of data breach. Succession planning. Now I mentioned that baby boomers are retiring. I've already retired once, and I'll do it again, I guess, probably in a few years. But there are many more like me as you start to get to that point in your career. You know, you're going to be walking away, and what is the succession plan that you have in the legal department for when those people start to retire? And hopefully it's not, well, gee, we'll just deal with it when it happens. If you have more than one or two people, now if it's one or two people, okay, that's different. That might be a little easier to deal with. But if you have a legal department of 10 people or 20 people or however big it may be, what is your plan for if someone who has a very critical key job leaves, how are you going to replace them? And there's an article here, again, all these links at the bottom can take you into deeper things when you get the soft copy of this that will go into a lot more detail. But to do succession planning right, the first thing you need to do is you need to understand, well, where's the business going? Right? What's our strategy for the next 2 years, for the next 3 years, for the next 5 years? Are we going to do a lot of mergers? Are we going to open up businesses in new countries? Are we going to start an entirely new line of business? And do I have the legal talent in the legal department to do that work? Or am I going to have to start bringing new people in? Am I going to have to train the people that I do have? You know, how am I going to evaluate people? What skills do I want them to have? And all of this goes into what's known as a formal succession plan. But if you don't have one, that's something you definitely should be thinking about in 2018. Reach out to your HR department. They are, they're really eager to help you. They have a lot of tools generally and can help you do this. But it's something that you really need to focus on. Do I have a question back there? Yes. Okay, the question was, does this formal succession plan have names in it? And the answer is absolutely yes. We have identified people who, look, there's no guarantee they're going to get the job, right? But you need to have a conversation with someone to say, look, we've identified you as a potential successor to be the general counsel or the associate general counsel for litigation or regulatory. These are the things that you will have to work on over the next year or the next 2 years to kind of get to the point where you would really truly be ready for it. But those are the types of things that you do with a succession plan. And then you have to update it every year. like any plan you have in an in-house legal department, you can't just stick it on the shelf and go, okay, great, tick the box, we're done, and then 3 years later go, oh crap, where are we with the succession plan? Where's that data breach plan, et cetera. So that's, if you don't have a succession plan, that's the next thing on your list. See, I'm already giving you work to do, which I know you're really appreciating as we head into next year. We talked about this briefly, but preparing for the General Data Protection Regulation. Does everyone know what this is? Has everyone heard about this? Anyone is going, I have no idea what you're talking about, Sterling? Okay, just one. All right, well, that's fine. This is the new data protection law. It's coming out of the EU. It's going to replace the Data Privacy Directive, which has been around for a little over 10 years. And this is going to put a much higher level of requirements on businesses that process data out of the European Union. And some of the questions you need to ask yourself about this law, first off, are we covered, right? And it may be you're not. So if you're not processing personal data of EU citizens, you're not covered, you don't have to worry about it. If your company has plans to process personal data of EU citizens, then you do need to worry about it because there's going to be a lot of requirements that have to be in place before you can do that legally. And if you do it illegally, there are some pretty horrendous fines that can be entered by the EU for violating these rules. Another thing you have to worry about is if you're handing off the processing to a processor, or if you are a processor and you're using a sub-processor, are they compliant? This law reaches all the way down to your company, anyone processing data for you, anyone processing data for them, and you're responsible at the top or wherever you sit to make sure that the person you're handing the data off to is compliant. So these laws just keep rolling up, and they keep rolling down, and you have a lot of obligations here. Do you have a plan to implement this? I was on a steering call committee meeting this morning for Marketo. We have a whole project management team, charts and green lights and red lights and all kinds of stuff going on to implement this. Now, we process a lot of data out of the EU, so I know our circumstances might be unique, but if you haven't started planning for this, you're pretty much reaching the end of the line when I think you can plan and successfully implement this. So if it's something you haven't been thinking about, now I wouldn't wait till January. I would start going back now and making sure, what are we doing about GDPR? Do we need to be concerned here? You need to have a legal basis for transferring the data between the EU and Canada, which I know currently the EU views Canada as having sufficient data privacy laws. But there is question about whether or not that will stand up under this new law. And I know I read earlier this week the Canadian data processor chief was already considering asking for more authority to enforce the laws here in Canada, to do more around that, because I think he's already anticipating that they might have some problems getting the legal basis to transfer the data under the new law. And then lastly, are your employees trained? And we talked a little bit about that just a second ago. It's kind of the same thing. Are they sensitive to making sure that personal data is only used for very specific purposes, it's gotten rid of in an appropriate time, we're not doing things with it that we shouldn't be doing. So this is a real big one and definitely should be on your list for 2018. The bane of every in-house lawyer's existence is the budget and the finance department, right? Because they're always telling you, you've got to cut, you got to do more with less. You hear this every year. We're not increasing your budget. Actually, we're taking it down. You have to find ways to make do with that. It's not a lot of fun. Dealt with that for years and years and years. And the one thing that I've noticed for sure is it used to be you could get away with saying, look, I can't tell you who's going to sue us. I can't tell you what kind of deals are going to come down. How do you expect me to plan for stuff that I have no control over? And usually you kind of got to pass. You don't get that anymore. You usually get from the CFO or from the finance people, look, every part of our business has uncertainty. They don't know what's coming, and they do this type of planning, so you need to do it too, and we need you to do it right. So what I learned pretty early was what they really want is to know that you're treating the legal department like it's part of the business. Like it's really, you're operating it, and you're not a bunch of drunken sailors down in the basement just, oh yeah, we'll hire this firm and that firm and this technology and that technology. You're really being thoughtful, and you're thinking about it. And there are 3 metrics that I think you really need to know in order to do that properly. And the first one is you need to know what are the market rates for legal services in your city, or could be in your province or at the country level, however you want to manage it, depending on what type of law firms you hire. And by market rates, I mean, on average, what does the average firm charge for contracts or litigation or whatever? Because what you ultimately want to do is you want to compare that against the firms that you are using. And you might find that they're pretty close. If you're really lucky, you'll find they're below. You might probably find that they're higher. But that's going to give you some tools when you go in to negotiate with those law firms about, look, I need to be able to tell my CFO that we're paying market rates for legal fees unless I have some real unique reason, like maybe it's a special type of litigation or a special type of legal issue and there's only a handful of people who do it. Otherwise, I look like a complete fool, right? I'm overpaying for legal service because the market rate is X and I'm paying 10% more than X. And you might hear, well, gee, we're giving you a 10% discount off our standard rates. Well, okay, but that's the same as, have you ever been in a hotel room and looked behind the door and you see that little notice that tells you this hotel room is $1,000 a night? And you wonder, who's dumb enough to pay $1,000 a night for that hotel room? I just paid $150, right? That's the same thing you should be thinking when law firms tell you, we're going to give you 10% off our regular rates. That's nice, but how does that compare to the market rates? And if you have an e-billing system, a lot of them make this information not only for your own average rates, but also bring that information in from other parts of the country. I know we use Legal Tracker, one of the Thomson Reuters products that does that for us. You can buy this information as well. You also need to be very aware of forecast versus actual spend. Forecast is my word for budget. Because as I was just telling you, you don't really have a good idea of what you're going to spend. You have a forecast, usually based on prior year's experience. It may be based on what you know is in the hopper already. Like, gee, we have 5 big pieces of litigation, or we know we're going to file 5 patents. Those are the things that you can kind of plan on and measure, but as you know, it's all going to change. Cases are going to settle, new cases will come in, there'll be some crazy deal they want to do in whatever country, you're going to have to figure out how to pay for that. So you have a forecast, and what you need to be able to do is very accurately tell the finance people what you're going to be spending, not only for the year, but probably for the quarter and maybe even by the month. I know every month, what we do with our firms is we tell them, look, I want to know what you just spent. So say it'll be the beginning of October, right, in a week. So next week, we'll go to all of our outside firms and we'll say, tell us what we just spent in September and forecast what we're going to spend in October. And sometimes you'll get, oh, gee, we can't tell. It's like, look, dude, if you can't tell me what you're going to be working on in 30 days, you're not much good to me, right? Because any experienced lawyer should be able to look out based on what they have on their plate and say, you know what, we're probably going to spend about $15,000 or $10,000 or $30,000. So that at least gives you a very close-in estimate of what you're going to spend, and then from that, you can start to pull the levers, right? If you wait until the bills come in, which is the old way that we used to do it a long time ago, those could be 60 or 90 days down the road, right? And now you're going, oh, wow, what were these guys working on? I didn't know they were doing that. Well, it's too late to start to make changes in your spend because you're already 90 days past. If you know kind of in real time what the spend is and what the forecast is, then you can measure that against what you're actually spending in your budget, and you can kind of start to figure out, gee, do we need to slow down? Do we need to tell them, you know what? We talked about 10 patents, we're only going to do 2 because I need that money over here. But it gives you the tools to be able to try to manage your budget in a way that can actually make a difference during the course of the year. So that's metric number 2. And the third metric, and even if the answer to this is no, the finance people always want to know, can you bring more of this in-house? Because in-house lawyers are probably a third of the cost of an outside law firm, maybe fully loaded, it just depends on the benefits, et cetera. The more work that you can bring in-house, and I apologize for any of the outside law firms here, I know there are several. I was with an outside law firm not that long ago. But if you can find a way to bring it in-house, that's going to be your best bet. And the finance people at least want to know that you did the math. And the math may be, no, we can't. We cannot do litigation internally at an in-house legal department. And I don't know many departments that are set up to actually cut checks, to do filing fees, have service of process delivered. There's a whole infrastructure that goes along with litigation. But I can tell you that we can do contracts pretty effectively, and anytime someone says we want to send a contract to an outside law firm, first question should be why? Why do we need to do that? Why don't we have, is it because we don't have the bandwidth, there's some particular issue? But those are the things you should be always constantly thinking about with respect to your budget. And even if the answer again is, look, we can't do it. We have to go to the outside law firm, but we picked the best firm. Here's why. They're the least expensive, or they're the most efficient. The finance guys are going to go, okay, we get it. They'll walk on. They'll leave legal alone. They'll go harass someone else. But they want to know that you're treating the legal budget like a business. The new buzzword for 2018 and even to 2017 is artificial intelligence. And I have to tell you right now, it's probably a little more hype than it is real, but the real part is coming. And this is something that I think all in-house lawyers are going to want to focus on. And the reason for that is when this is fully developed, this will actually allow you to do more with less. Because the day is coming when you can get first drafts of contracts. To some extent, it already is here. First drafts of contracts, first drafts of memos. You can analyze your entire email database of the company for fraud or bad actors and get all that information sent to you before you have to ever pick up a finger. And all that drudge work, reviewing this or reviewing that, can be done with artificial intelligence, leaving you more time to think. And that's probably the one thing that I found is the hardest itch to scratch as an in-house lawyer is I just want some more time to think about the frickin' answer before I have to give it, right? Because if you got the CEO on the phone or the board on the phone or whoever going, I want the answer, I want the answer, I want the answer. And you're doing maybe the basic research and you're kind of skimping on the answer. This will change that when it's fully deployed, and you'll have much more time to think about things. And I think you're going to see your costs go down, especially as outside firms start to adopt this too. They'll be able to offer you bigger discounts on document reviews, on due diligence, on other tasks that are maybe more manual or more rote than the thinking part. They may charge you more for the advice part, right? Because that's going to be more valuable. But that's something that I would always pay for an outside lawyer to do. Because I do value that advice. I think that's really, really, really important. So, checking what are my law firms doing? Can I glob onto that? Hey, can I use that? Is there something that you can give me? Is there something that I can do? Or I'll be your test case. Can you give me some discounts here? That's a conversation worth having. Are there just some simple ways that you can implement it into the legal department? You don't have to go out and launch a $200,000 project to implement artificial intelligence. There are things that you can do for $10,000 or $15,000 that can have a big savings, especially when it comes to contract assembly. We're launching a contract assembly tool, and it's going to have some artificial intelligence elements to it. And it's going to be a lot of self-service with the business for the first time. By the time they have to talk to legal, they'll have gone through this entire chain of, this is our standard form. These are the clauses that you can put in if they don't like this clause, and this is what you do if you don't want to do that. This is how it's going to get signed, all online. It's going to get managed over here. We will only have to touch it in legal if it goes outside of certain set parameters. That will be a godsend, I know, to the business, because, we don't have to deal with legal, yay. And to lawyers, we don't have to deal with the business, yay. That's kind of a mutual admiration society on that, because there's a lot of work that you just go round and round on stuff that just seems to repeat itself all the time, right? No, we will not agree to Indonesian law. We will agree to UK. We will agree to arbitration in France, but you can get all that stuff set out. And all that's going to be run in large part due to artificial intelligence. I would also put someone in charge of it. If you're interested in this, now again, depends on how big your department is. It might be you. I was in a small legal department, so I know about delegating to yourself. But if you can, there might be someone in the department who's really interested in this, and you say, you know what? You're our bird dog. You go pay attention to this. You see what's coming in. If you see an opportunity for us, you bring it. They're probably going to be excited to have something that they're in charge of, right? Because how hard is it to give people stuff that they're totally responsible for? Here's an opportunity to do that, and say, you bring us something whenever you think it's of interest, and you watch this for us. And then the last thing I would do on this is make a friend in IT. Take them to lunch, take them to coffee, because you're not going to get anything done with artificial intelligence unless your IT department is fully bought in and they're willing to help you. They're going to help you implement it. And it may be you find someone who's also interested in this. They want to do it in other places in the company, and you can say, look, we'll be your guinea pig. You help us implement this in legal, and then we'll go talk to accounting. We'll go talk to whatever group, sales, and we'll say, this is great. You should do this, and here's the test case. Here's how we saved time and money in the legal department. So having a friend in IT is a really good thing to do as well. And it can also help you when your computer crashes, because that's my fate in life, I've realized. When was the last time you looked at your company's website? I mean, you just read it from start to finish. It's probably been 12th of never, or maybe it's been a year, maybe a couple years. This was one of the things that we had on our index card when I was GC, and we will definitely be doing this at Marketo, is we just picked a week, whatever month, I don't know what month we'll pick, and we said, okay, your job is to go into our website, and to our terms and conditions, our privacy notice, all this stuff. I want you to check every link. Does it work? If it says send an email here for help, does that email go somewhere? And does someone respond to it? Do we have the most up-to-date language on limits of liability? Do we want arbitration or exclusive venue jurisdiction? Is our privacy notice up to date? Are we living up to the things that we put in there? If you wrote it 5 years ago and it's never been updated, odds are it's not going to be very useful. I can tell you at Travelocity, when we did this, we changed to no class actions and arbitration for any dispute. And we got drug into this antitrust litigation in Dallas. And we got out on summary judgment because the judge said, sorry, no class actions, and it all has to be arbitrated. And they just dropped us because no plaintiff's lawyer wants to go case by case in arbitration. That was a change that we made on one of our yearly reviews. We said, you know what, we should put that in. And we read about it somewhere, and we put it in there. So, and in the U.S., there's a whole nother avenue. I don't know if you have this problem here in Canada, accessibility by the blind or disabled. There's a lot of litigation in the U.S., and it's not so much about the money. It's a little bit about the money. A lot of it's just about embarrassing your company and getting you to make changes, and no one likes their company to be in the news for the wrong reasons. So this is another thing that we spent some time is, can disabled people access all the critical parts of our website? Can a blind person access it? Are we up to the standards, et cetera? And I mentioned, do all the links work? So I would say once a year, especially if you haven't done this in some time, go through your website and just see, does it work and is it up to par for 2018? Do you have a legal department website? How many people, we won't even do a poll, how many people have legal department websites available to your employees? Okay, great. There's a lot of people who don't. I would tell you, it is a really valuable resource, and you should have one. And if you do have one and you haven't paid any attention to it, next year is the time you should sit down and let's spend some time thinking about our website and updating it. It can be a gigantic time saver with such things as frequently asked questions where you can, people get called like, well, what do we do if there's a subpoena? Or what's the formal address of the company? And all these emails that people have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, you can start to put that information on the website and go to the website, go to the website, go to the website, and start to defer some of that time. You can put form agreements. That's probably the most valuable thing that you can do. If you have forms, you don't have a contract assembly tool, but you have forms. Non-disclosure agreement, the number one agreement that we got requested for in legal, every place I've been, even at Marketo. So our website, I said, you know what, guys? We're going to have a big button right here. It's almost half the page. It says non-disclosure agreement. Click here, because that's the one that drives the most calls and the most emails. And there it is. You can find it. You can fill it out yourself. You don't even need us to get involved as long as you stick with the form. Another thing, and I'll be interested to know, I'll just look at the heads nodding. The business people think if you have a law degree, you know everything about every law. If it's tax, if it's corporate, if it's litigation, if it's immigration, they don't care. And you can't blame them, right? They just know you're a lawyer, so they think there's a big book of law, and you pull it down, and there's all these answers when you open it up, and we all know that's not how it works, but that's how they think about it, and you have to deal with that. And one of the things that we did is we created a little chart that said, who does what? And it was designed so when people said, I have a litigation question, well, here are the 3 lawyers who do litigation. Or if I have a question about a contract, well, here's the 2 people who do contracts or a sweepstakes, whatever it might be. It was a way of getting them to the right people versus sending it to me or sending it to someone and they're trying to get it to the right person, and you get that game of email tag, right? It keeps going down the line, and you thought, oh my God, that took half a day to get this in the right person's hands. If you think about the amount of time you waste, or I won't say waste, but you spend answering questions that could be on an FAQ, or getting documents to people that could be in a list of forms, or just getting the legal request to the right person. Let's say it's an hour a week or 2 hours a week. Well, that's 8 hours a month. That's 96 hours a year. That's almost 2 weeks of time that you could save for yourself if you have something like this that people could go to. All those little minutes, all those little increments add up. And I always try to convince my people of that. If you can save an hour a week, that's going to be huge down the end, because that's going to be more time that you can spend on productive legal work versus what we consider things that just aren't quite as valuable. And finally, on this slide, a legal department website helps you market the legal department. The worst thing you can be as a legal department is viewed as a cost center. Because you know what happens to cost centers? They get cut. They keep getting cut. They get questions asked about why do you have so many people? Why does it cost so much? But if you're viewed as, wow, look, our legal department, they help us get deals done. They offer all these great services. They're always available to us, or they make it easy for us to do things. Now you're viewed as more on the indispensable side of the ledger versus, oh yeah, I have to deal with the legal guys. I don't like doing that. They're such a pain in the ass. You've heard all the criticisms. So one of the things that I've always tried to do is just make sure that we're always out marketing the legal department. This is a great way to do it. If you have a good website, people are going to go to it, they're going to use it, and they're going to just think better of you. Just like any consumer goes to a company's website and it's kind of cool and it looks good and it's easy to use, you have a very good impression of that company. If you go to that company's website and it sucks and it's hard to navigate and it looks like it's from 1997, you have a very bad impression of that company. It works exactly the same internally. So it's worth spending some time on your website. And then with your new buddy from IT that you just made with artificial intelligence, you can get a lot of help with this one. And now you're going to have a kick-ass website. I believe, we call it the attorney-client privilege in the U.S. I know it's solicitor-client privilege here. In Canada, you may call it attorney-client privilege. I thought I would at least try to use the proper terms. I view this as an asset of the company, just like a building or accounts receivable, and it's something that you really have to spend time and effort on protecting and nourishing, because if you think something is covered by the attorney-client privilege and it's not, it is a very painful and bad day for you in the legal department, and maybe a bad day for you personally. And I unfortunately have lived those days where there are things that you thought were privileged and the judge disagrees and you kind of scratch your head and you can't really believe why. But you go back and you say, okay, we're going to make some changes here, guys, on how we're doing things around the attorney-client privilege. And the other thing I found out over time is that the litigators are pretty good about understanding how the privilege works. The corporate guys have no freaking idea. Generally, they say, oh, that's a litigation deal. No, it's not. It's everybody in the legal department is responsible for understanding how the attorney-client privilege works and making sure that all the documents that deserve it, not all of them do, but all the documents that deserve it are protected by it. And there are really three key things. It's exactly the same here as it is in Canada, same in the UK, same in Australia, all the common law countries. These three things are exactly the same. So first, it has to be a communication between the client and the lawyer, solicitor. It can't be between two people talking about, I'm going to go talk to the lawyer. They actually have to have a lawyer involved in there somewhere. Now, you can pass the advice along, right? If you give advice to one of the business people and they tell their direct reports, look, I talked to legal and here's what we need to do next, that's okay. But if it's just a couple guys off to the side, that's not going to work. If they're just copying legal on the email, you probably see that a lot, right? There's a CC, and why am I on this? Well, we wanted to make it privileged. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. In fact, that's almost the worst thing you can do, because now it looks like you're trying to hide something. And if you get in litigation, they will be bearing in on that, going, well, look right here, they're trying to hide all their evil activity. And well, they were trying to do what they thought covered the attorney-client privilege. You have to be asking for legal advice, right? It can't be business advice. Now, I have to tell you, as an in-house lawyer, that's probably the hardest thing to distinguish between, right? Because a lot of the things, especially if you're dealing with contracts, it could go potentially either way. So we'll talk about how to fix that in just a second, but that's one of the hardest things, I think, in anyone's in-house career, is separating business and legal advice. It's much easier if you're outside counsel. There's almost a default that it's covered by the privilege, and it's almost the reverse when you're in-house now, at least down in the States. I don't know if that's creeping into here in Canada, where judges are trying to get very suspicious of any in-house claims of privilege, like you're trying to hide something, you're trying to mask business advice with the privilege. And then it has to be kept confidential. My favorite email, I'm being facetious, is when the business guy takes your email and sends it to the other side and goes, my lawyer says that you need to do this, and here's why. And you're going, oh my God. No, please don't forward legal advice outside of the company or even widely within the company. It really needs to be limited to those who need to know about the issue. It just can't be something like, hey, this is a good idea from legal, and they blast it out to 2,000 people. Now you've put the privilege in jeopardy. So the first thing you need to do to try to fix all of this, is you need to make sure that the documents are properly marked. And this is going to sound a little bit like cover your ass, and I'm telling you that, yes, that's exactly what it is. So a little bit of CYA here. First, whatever it is, it should just have a little legend on it in the header or the footer that says attorney-client privilege, solicitor-client privilege, whatever you want to put, privileged, confidential. So what that's going to do, the minute there's litigation or there's ever any question, whoever sees that document is going to see that legend right at the top, and they're going to go, this document may be privileged, I'm going to put it over here, and we're going to look at it closer. I'm not guaranteeing you that it's privileged, but it's certainly going to get pulled. If you've ever been in a big lawsuit, you've had those armies of lawyers going through everything, if they see that, it's a lot more likely that privileged documents aren't going to get slipped through and get produced if you have a legend like that. The really important thing, though, is to actually have, in the first sentence or two, someone say, I am asking you for legal advice. Or if you're writing to someone, you're saying, this is my legal advice. And the reason for that, it sounds kind of stupid, sounds kind of silly, it is, but think of yourself think about if there's a fight over a privilege log and there's 1,000 documents on it. It's a real big litigation. And you're fighting over this document's privileged, no it's not, this is, and the judge goes, okay, I'm going to review this stuff in camera. Now the judge may have a clerk, they may not, it depends on the level of the court, but someone's going to have to take all those 1,000 documents and they're going to have to start reading them, right? And if there's 1,000 documents, that means it's multiple thousands of pages because they're not one page. Make it easy for whoever's reading it in that first paragraph to go, this is my legal advice. Okay, thank God, that's privilege, that's over here. That's all it takes. Now again, if you're trying to hide something and you just put that sentence in, it's probably going to be found out. But if it truly is privileged, just make sure that you mark it that way. And you mark every document, right? Not only the email, but if there's an attachment, you need to make sure that attachment has the same legend, privileged, under review of legal counsel for legal advice, whatever you want to put down there. And some of the link there will give you some examples of wording to put on the document. And the reason for that is if it's separated, for some reason, then that exhibit's going to have its own legend that'll cause someone to look at it. Or I've even had a case where, unfortunately, the email had the legend, but the document didn't, and the judge said, well, the email's privileged, but the document's not because it doesn't say anything on it about being privileged. And again, you're ready to pull your hair out, but that's how some judges think. So you just try to eliminate all the possible ways that they can say, this is not a privileged document. So this is something, and then you have to train not only the legal department, but the business. You have to train them not to send things outside of the company. You have to train them to put in that first sentence, I need you to give me your legal advice about X or Y, whatever the case is. And it will pay off in spades. It's a little bit of a pain, but going out and training the business, either in person or even through an email blast where you say these are the rules for how to properly use privilege, any little bit helps because this is something that you just really, really need to protect, in my opinion. Now the last thing I have here on my list, this is number 10. This is updating your compliance your compliance program. And these are some of the different things that I know we spend a lot of time on: antitrust, anti-bribery, up the ladder. So, what if your lawyers think there's a crime being committed or something that would violate, seriously violate the law? Where do they report it? Have you trained them? Are you trained? Do you know where to go? If you think the CEO is involved in a criminal activity, what do you do? Do you know? And if you don't, that's a pretty good clue that you should be putting something together for either for yourself, if you're at a small department, or your team of, here's what we are going to do. Here's the outside lawyer we're going to call if we think it's serious enough. All that stuff, again, it's just like having a plan, who we're going to deal with. Do you have a compliance hotline? A lot of countries, with the regulators, you have to have to really minimize a sentence or a fine, you have to have a hotline. You have to have an email system where people can send anonymous emails if they think there's a problem, and you have to have a process for following up on that. Do you have that? Does it work? Do the links work? We found some of ours didn't, and the phone number that we had purchased a couple years ago was dead. It wasn't even a dial tone. So those are things that if you just assume it's all working, and you don't check it every year, you're just never going to know what's going to happen. Do you have an internal investigation process? So if you're investigating, employees that you think might be engaged in problematic behavior, do you have set templates that you use so every investigation looks the same and feels the same? Because I think the worst thing you can have for a regulator is, well, yeah, we kind of looked at this one, but we didn't think it was that serious. But this one, we had all this documentation for, and the regulator's going to go, well, why did you decide this one was more serious than this one? This one actually turned into something to be a problem. Just have a process that's repeatable, and you treat every report, every investigation the same way. It may be short, it may be really long, but you can go to the regulator and say, we do every investigation exactly the same way. These are the 5 pieces of paper that we produce, and that will give the regulator comfort, because what they're really doing, they're kind of checking the box going, are these guys good guys? Are they doing the things they need to be doing? Or do we think, they're kind of sloppy and they're really not paying attention? And that's when things can really spiral and get out of control. All right, does anyone have a question? Or I will not be insulted if you do not ask me a question. Okay, very good. Well, as I think most of you know, I wrote a book. I wrote 2 books. I've written 2 books so far. One was on football, if you care about American football. That's the blue one. And I have this one that the ABA published. Great. I'll be happy to sign it.